Hello there. It's okay, folks. The regulators have saved us from Credit Suisse causing another banking crisis. If you believe them, that is. Oh, and there's also a new angle to the global climate crisis, just to keep that issue bubbling nicely along. Now first, a quick bit of breaking news. The Dutch Farmers' Protest Party has just taken 15 seats in their country's Senate, something that will put the cat amongst the pigeons, where plans to cut the number of livestock and buy out farms and shut them down in order to obey EU climate laws are concerned. Well, that didn't last long, did it? 3 failed US banks and Switzerland's second largest just about to go under, taking the rest with it, and we're saved by the Swiss Central Bank, or so we're told. But just to give you an idea of how weird this is, yesterday the Credit Suisse share price was tanking, and there was talk of it being snapped up by another bank, UBS, and being part of a wider banking market contagion. The bank has had problems, we were told, and both depositors and investors were the rats leaving the sinking ship. While the bank's own management team said there were no problems and they didn't need a central bank bailout. Then, as is normal with these things, there was a sudden deal done overnight, and we wake up to hear that Credit Suisse has secured the equivalent of a 44.5 billion quid or $54 billion bailout from the Swiss Central Bank. And suddenly, the investors are piling back in, and the bank's share price has rocketed up by over 12% by 2 p.m. today and helped the FTSE 100 to recover a little lost ground too. But this bank's stock has been grinding downwards for over 2 years after scandals and losses, and looked about to go boom. But suddenly, overnight, it's turned to gold. So the message is that any failing bank can suddenly become a good investment as long as it has a serious central bank behind it. And that bailout, as far as I can tell, is somewhere in the region of 6 or 7% of Swiss GDP. Does this sound sustainable to you? How can it be sustainable without a change in the management and culture of Credit Suisse? But the finance industry obviously thinks it is. Possibly because a buyout is in the offing, maybe. Well, they would like it, wouldn't they, with the taxpayer once again on the hook for any bank losses, I suppose. Credit Suisse was obviously just another of the too big to let fail, or should I say too big to not bail out. But many experts are claiming that Credit Suisse is also too big to bail out, and that it can't ultimately be bailed out. And they say that global central banks need to put firewalls in place to prevent any contagion spreading. Now, many have said that all this might put interest rate rises on hold, even as central banks claim we need to raise rates to fight inflationary pressures. But the European Central Bank increased its rate today by 0.5% to 3% and said its banking system is solid and it stands ready to react to the Credit Suisse situation if needed. But whereas further ECB rate rises had in the past looked baked in due to the pressure of inflation, the message now appears to be that there may be a pause in ECB rate rises. So has a banking crisis been averted, or is there more pain to come? And will this current situation cause inflation to hang on higher for longer because interest rates are kept too low? I personally agree with the view that there will be a slow-motion set of crises with central banks trying to cut each problem out and isolate them as they arise. Something that leads inexorably towards the very few large banks, over time, soaking up all the little guys. This arguably makes the control of the financial system much easier for the authorities and makes any transition to a central bank digital currency far more straightforward. Not that anyone's thinking about that, of course. Now, with all this talk of too big to fail and too big to bail, doesn't it strike you that it just means we have too few banks and that they are all far too big? Doesn't that mean that we need smaller banks within a framework where one goes under, it doesn't take the global economy down with it, requiring humongous bailouts every few years? But our lords and masters still insist on huge great banks that wield colossal power, being overseen by regulators whose prime job, it appears, is to be ready with the nation's chequebook to fund the next banking bailout. Now, one thing that sticks out to me is the stoic way in which Switzerland is approaching this. Can you imagine the political meltdown here in the UK today if the government was forced to open up a line of credit for 6% of GDP, about 130 billion quid or more, just to save one bank? All very strange. Now, it was not only Credit Suisse whose shares were temporarily suspended from trading yesterday. There were others. So maybe there are more banks to be targeted in this way in the coming weeks and months. A slow-rolling financial crisis, as some put it. A crisis that has the potential to move a lot of wealth upwards, as they always seem to do. And the UK tax system has already been set up by the Tories to wring as much out of us as they can anyway. Now, as I warned at the start of the video, you are all going to have to add a new concept and a new term to your understanding of the net zero climate crisis. You have all, of course, heard of climate warming, climate change, and even climate heating. But you may well not have heard of climate stilling or global stilling. OK, it's a concept that's been around for a couple of years, but is little known about. Yes, global stilling, another way of scaring the climate horses. And this one is going to literally take the wind out of the sails of the wind turbine industry. That's because, according to the climate experts, climate change is slowing our global air currents down. That means the speed of our prevailing winds could fall by some 10% by the year 2100, reports an FT video, with the obvious effect on the efficiency of those wonderful green wind turbines. And the cause of this is that the polar regions of the planet are warming faster than the rest of it, so reducing the temperature differentials across the globe that drives wind speeds. But we were warned by the climateers of massive damaging storms, weren't we? You know, global warming causing global storming, not global stilling. So did they get that bit wrong? And have they got anything else wrong? Anyway, it seems the answer to this latest crisis is to have more and more wind turbines littering the oceans, but further and further out to sea. Great for anyone invested in the green industry, isn't it? But surely the more wind turbines you have, the more energy you will be removing from air currents, so slowing them down even more. Anyway, global stilling. So make sure you are now more scared than you were yesterday and have more climate fear-induced sleepless nights. And more importantly, another reason to tax you, force you into a 15-minute neighbourhood and ban you from owning a car.